Okay, so today I want to talk about R.Kelli. Um, he's been in the news recently, and he's always been, maybe not always, but for the most part, people always had mixed feelings about him, because there's always controversy surrounding his name. But I've observed some things, and I'm a little troubled by some of the allegations, and I'm troubled by some of the findings. I'm not totally disturbed because I understand that human beings in general, we're all kind of traumatized and messed up to some degree. I want to preface this by saying that when people do bad things, it's not because they are evil. It's not because they're bad people. It's not because they're innately bad. It's because they're desperate. They're desperate, they're not evil. Okay? We're so quick to call judgment on human beings who do bad things because we don't understand that they are operating from a place of desperation. It's not because they're evil, and it's not because they're bad. People end up doing bad things as a way of disguising their weaknesses and their hurt and their pain. And they disguise it as strength and power and aggression because they want you to interpret it that way. They do it to disguise the weaknesses that is deriving from their trauma, the trauma that they experienced as children, right? We all were traumatized. Some people are going to come on here and say to me, well, we're all traumatized, so why some people end up becoming serial killers and drug dealers and all these bad things that they do, because we're all traumatized to different degrees. And not only that, you have people who grew up in the same home with siblings who didn't turn out to be as bad as they turned out. And the reasons why is that people process their hurt and their pain and their trauma differently. People are hurt to different degrees. Some people have bodies, and this is where spirituality comes into play and has to be a part of the conversation, because spiritually we enter this life with different levels of sensitivity, and certain things that bothers some people or hurt some people, they're both hurt, or but they're not hurt the same. Okay, they're hurt at different degrees because some people are more sensitive than others. Now, that being said, I've seen the interview, not interview, the program, the BBC program, with this Indian guy doing some research on R.Kelli, going around interviewing people that have known him throughout the years. It was a very it's interesting and boring at the same time, that program. There's something about that whole BBC thing that disturbs me. I don't know, I can't put my finger on it yet, but I found it really strange. But from my expertise and from what I've gathered, I believe R.Kelli is a narcissist. He might have I can't say he's a sociopath because I don't know how deep it runs, but from what I've seen, there's some highly narcissistic personality traits. There's a personality disorder there, and it starts at narcissism. I'm doing like a psychoanalysis on why I believe he's a certain way. I've seen, I did some, not only with the BBC program, but I did a little bit more research, and I got some little more research on his childhood, because I never really heard about R.Kelli's childhood, right? And what I found was interesting, and I based on what I've seen for his childhood, I think I understand. And I came up with some points as to why he turned out the way he is, with certain different personality traits, right? So some of the people are saying that he is controlling, and some of the girls are saying that he's controlling. Now, this possibly derived from him having a possibly controlling mother. I don't know for sure that she was totally controlling, but from I could read between people's energy, and I could tell by the vibe that they're giving about a certain person that a certain person's a certain way. And I believe that is either a controlling mother and or a controlling father figure. It seems like he didn't have his own father growing up, but he had a stepfather, it seems, and from what I understand, that he didn't really love him or like him, but it seems as though somebody was controlling in the house. So this controlling personality that he has is a way for him to take back the power that he lost, or that he believed that he lost from that controlling person in his childhood, the controlling parental figure in his childhood, right? And this is a way for him to feel more powerful, because when you don't grow up with your own father, and when you have somebody who's controlling you, you start to feel less of a man, and then you go out in your life and in your throughout your younger adult life and your adult life on a mission to take back that power. You understand? What we observe as the public, we see that he is hypersexual, right? And from what I gather is that his mother was almost like a religious fanatic. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe she was not fanatical. Maybe it was somebody else in the house that he looked up to that was fanatical religiously. But I believe it's his mother. Okay. And when you grow up in a house like that, where somebody is a, I mean, in a house or a community or a culture that is super religious, you're gonna grow up with a lot of shame, because people are gonna believe highly in morals and living sexually purely, or pure sexuality, and that's not easy for people to achieve, and I don't think that's achievable. So what that does to the psyche is that it causes this suppression of the sexuality. And when you suppress your sexuality, you're just causing your sexuality to exist in a unhealthy state, because anything you suppress is going to stay there and it's going to fester, and you're going to focus on that thing negatively. And when you focus negatively on anything, anything related to that thing is going to be negative. So it's going to be unhealthy. So he has this unhealthy sexuality because he suppressed his sexuality. It's like he believes it's wrong, but he wants it so bad. So there's a conflicting consciousness as far as his sexuality. And once that starts happening, you become hypersexual because you're so focused on it. Okay, because you're fighting it, and whenever you're fighting something, you're focused highly on it. And if you're fighting it in a negative way, it's gonna result in an unhealthy, especially in this case, a unhealthy sexuality. There's another thing with this hypersexuality. Whenever children experience abandonment, and maybe he didn't experience abandonment from his mother per se, but you see, the feeling of being abandoned is just as valid as if you were being actually being abandoned, because your consciousness and your mind don't know the difference between actual abandonment and the fee and just the perception of abandonment. Do you understand? So if you as a baby or a child and your mother leaves you, if your mother leaves you to go to the store for a while, the feeling of abandonment takes you over. So he's probably dealing with abandonment issues from his mother and his father. And once you have that, there is a strong need for connection. And one of the strongest way that people connect with people is through sex. And feeling people sexually makes you feel super connected to them. So that, I think, adds to the hypersexuality. From what I understand, some people say he has a bit of a split personality. Like he is he's super religious, super spiritual, but kind of deviant and hedonistic. That also goes back to the religious home. Growing up in a religious home, well, with a religious mother, let's put it this way, because I believe it's his mother that was super religious, right? That parent, this need to please them, okay? So you never really totally lose this need to please your parents. So I believe the reason why R.Kelli seems so spiritual and so schizophrenic about his personality when it comes to being spiritual and hypersexual is because he was exposed to sex as a young age, which I'm going to speak on in a little bit, and he was exposed to sex and being super religious in the same home, and probably by the same people. So this need to please this person, you have to please your parents by being good and being religious, and then you're being exposed to sex, and the idea that I just gave you about the suppression and the hypersexuality because of that, that adds to is the split consciousness, where he's this Jekyll and Hyde person. I'm religious and I'm good, but I'm a deviant and I am like almost a pervert also. Now, the attraction to young girls. When people go through severe trauma, whether it's sexual trauma or in their childhoods, whether it's sexual trauma or physical abuse that caused trauma, or any kind of a traumatic situation in the childhood, sometimes in that child's consciousness, the trauma was so intense and so painful that a certain aspect of their consciousness is left in that childhood. It's like you're exposed to something, but it was so traumatic that a part of you is still focused on that thing, and it's still focused on that level of focused on that trauma, because it's like you're stuck in that state in your childhood because you can't get past it. You can't get healing. So a part of you, that can't get the healing, is still stuck in your childhood. And I believe this is what happened to R.Kelli. Something really horrible happened to him in his childhood. It could be sexual, and because he did say he was sexually I don't know if it was molested or was just assaulted by someone in his childhood that he looked up to. So a certain aspect of his consciousness is stuck in his childhood. So now he has a very damaged inner child that is stuck in the childhood. So in order for him and other people like him and also people who are pedophiles, I'm not saying R.Kelli is a pedophile because I don't know for sure that he is, but I'm saying people who are pedophile, people like him who are attracted to younger people and younger girls, for them to to somehow bridge the gap between where they are and where that childhood self is, that is stuck in the consciousness of their childhood, that is of their childhood self, that is stuck in their childhood. In order for them to bridge the gap, it's like a subconscious process, and it is a subconscious process for them to bridge the gap from where they are to with that inner child. They connect with people, they connect with children, and sometimes they connect with young people and younger women in his case, to somehow fill the void that was missing, to somehow compensate for that the aspect of their childhood that they didn't get to process, or they didn't get it healing. It's a way for them to get a healing. It's like connecting with somebody's innocence, and the innocence of the young people that they're around. When that happens, is like you're forced to, I mean, let's say it's a sexual trauma, right? It's like you're forced to grow up, and you're exposed to something that adults do. So it's like you're conflicting, and in order for you to really connect with that childhood self, to bring healing to that childhood self, to the healing to the childhood self part of you that is traumatized, you connect with people. You see, we take from people what we can't give to ourselves. So if we have a consciousness that is still in a childhood state, that part of our consciousness, which is a part of us, wants to connect with people that it could relate to. So, and this is one reason why, because I did hear that R.Kelli, he's still very childish in some ways, like, and that's the process that's going on. You see. And the other thing, interesting thing, when I watched the interview, his brother said something very interesting. His brother said that his mother, or their mother, would, at Christmas time, she wouldn't give them toys. She would give them musical instruments. Now, I don't know to what degree this was. I don't know if he actually did get toys sometimes, or maybe he didn't get any toys. I don't know how much of this is true, or how deep it ran, or, but if there is some truth to this, and I'm sure there's some truth to it if his brother is saying it, when that happens, it's like you're being forced to grow up. Like, you're not allowing the child to have a childhood. Okay? It's a kind of a trauma. It's a kind of trauma that happens because when you don't allow a child to be a child, you're forcing them to grow up, and so they miss out. And this is what happened to Michael Jackson also. They were so into their music that they didn't get time to embrace their own childhood. So they're forced to grow up. And this is another way how somebody like R.Kelli, for them to connect with their childhood, the part of their childhood that was taken away from them, they still feel like a child because they didn't get to live through, gradually ease their way into adulthood. So in order for that part of their consciousness to feel whole, they have to connect with children, because it's like the part of their consciousness can't really relate to adults, and the part of their consciousness don't like adults, they don't trust adults, and they trust children, and they feel like a child. If you feel like a child, you only could relate to a child, and sometimes it becomes sexual. Now, I know I've been using the word child. I don't know if any other, because I don't think people under, or should I say people over 14 or 13 are children. I see them as teenagers. So I don't know if he's been with anybody under 13. If that's the case, then he is definitely a pedophile. But I don't know that he is, so I'm not going to call him that. Now, there is this thing of R.Kelli being attracted to his own mother. He said it from his own mouth. I don't know how deep it was, but this is what he said. Now, this is the Oedipus complex, which, from what I understand, a lot of people go through. I don't have any memory of it in my childhood, but people believe that it is way more common than we think. And this is the Oedipus complex to like times a million, right? And the reason why it's so big for R. Kelly, or it was so big for him, it's because he had a very strong need to connect with his mother, because he felt abandoned by his father. And when you feel abandoned by your father, the only person you have is your mother. So there's this clingy thing that he had with his mother, and I believe his mother was clingy to him too. And once that starts happening, there's this strong attachment that they have. And I also believe that there is this okay, let me just say that the attachment issue that they had is because of the lack of connection, okay? And the lack of connection that he had with the father, or issue with abandonment. And once you when that starts happening, depending on how sensitive the child is, and I'm assuming he was a very sensitive child, your connection that you need from the parent that you have is so intense that you want to connect with them in every way, and sometimes it becomes sexual, right? I also believe that there is a need to please his mother, so much more than the other siblings that he had. Because when you are an older sibling and you have younger siblings, sometimes on a subconscious level, you will feel abandoned by the parent. Because now it was you, and now this parent is paying attention to younger children, so it's almost like you don't matter anymore because somebody else is in the picture. And I believe this happened to R. Kelly and his younger siblings. And he had this need he had to share the attention with um, the, the attention of his mother and the affection of his mother with the other siblings, and he hated that. I believe on a subconscious level he hated it. Maybe he didn't say he hated it, because in a religious home you have to make sure you do what is right, and you can't actually say how you actually feel. So I think he had this need to please her more than them. So he wanted to connect with her much more than they did, have a deeper connection than the other siblings. So that sometimes, like I said, the ultimate kind of a connection on this planet, in this life, is like sex. When you're sexually into someone, it doesn't get closer than that. And I think that is what is going on, or that was what was going on with him and his mother. As far as the peeing on the women thing, this is a need to have these women take a part of him with them. Okay? It's almost like cannibalism. A cannibal eats people to take a part of that person with them. Well, when people, if somebody wants you to eat them, which is the reverse situation, or they want their body fluids on you, or in this case pee. Some people get deviant and use poop. I don't know if R.Kelli used poop. There is this rumor, but I hope not. Jesus. It's because it's another way of connecting with people. Okay, he wanted these women to take a part of him with them, and it's a kind of a control too. It's this kind of a, if I pee on you, I own you kind of thing. Subconsciously, that's what it means. He wanted these women to take a part of him with them, and the pee, on a subconscious level, the pee is like a part of him. So it's like he owns them. If he was actually peeing on these women, it's like he owns them. You know, it's a very deeply subconscious, twisted thing, and it's not easy for people to understand how that may be. I mean, I hope you guys are getting what I'm saying, though. But here's the thing about this whole thing with people like R. Kelly, right? people like him, they connect with people in deviant ways because they learned somewhere along their childhood, somewhere along life, to that a direct connection, because a direct connection is like a loving connection. It's upfront, it's authentic. And people are afraid of love. We were taught that love is weak and affection is weak, okay? Or is weakness. And when we learn that, we still, the need for connection is still there. So if we can't connect with them in an upfront, authentic, loving way, the connection is going to have to go in a very underground way, in a very sneaky way, in a deviant way. Because the connection is still there and it has to happen. The need for connection is still there and you have to get it. You have to get connection. So I believe he learned somewhere along the way that I mean, we're all kind of afraid of love, right? But maybe it was very big for him, or maybe it wasn't bigger for him than anybody else, but he still learned that. So because of all the trauma that he experienced, he needed that connection with people, but he couldn't ask for it, or he can't get it up front, or there's this thing in our homes where sometimes our need for connection and affection and attention is shunned by our parents. You know, when we tried to get love directly, it was shunned by our parents, and these feelings and emotions and concerns and the vulnerability that was there originally, you know, they were shamed and they were invalidated. And then we learn at that stage that we shouldn't ask for love, or we shouldn't be vulnerable. But like I said, we have to connect. Humans have to connect with each other. So if they can't connect in a pure, direct, loving way, they have to connect in a unpure, indirect, manipulative kind of a way. And in what the form that takes is the form, this need for power, okay, for control, right, deviance. And what these people don't know is that what they don't know, or what they don't want you to know, is that they do these things because they want to feel loved, okay? So, you know, we're looking at a very traumatized person, an extremely traumatic childhood for him, extremely traumatic. And the deviance and the aggression that people inflict on others is like a coping strategy. It's a way for them to cope with life. Okay, it's a way, it's not evil. It's a way for him, in this case, to cope with the hurt. It's all hurt, but he cannot present it as hurt or weakness or fear, because then that will be seen for what it is. Nobody wants to be perceived as being hurt and being pain, living in pain, because people perceive these things are weakness, so they disguise them. They disguise this weakness or this perceived weakness with power and aggression and control and arrogance and aggression and sometimes bravado. Now, this is not even about R.Kelli. People in general, we mask our pain and our hurt with perceived strength, or what we want to believe is strength. So this is, we're all doing this to some degree. It's just that depending on the trauma that we experienced as children, the level of trauma and the level of sensitivity of the child, this hurt and this pain and this trauma is going to cause for you to put on, to develop these extreme cases of of narcissism and these extreme cases of deviance and extreme manipulation. And this is all coming from people's traumatic childhood, and it's sad that this is what happens to us because of our parents' ignorance as far as what actual real healthy parenting is. So from me knowing all this, and by us knowing this now, I don't know how much of it you will accept, because maybe you're looking at me like I'm making excuses for R.Kelli, which is not the case. We have to look at people who are so-called criminals, that they're not criminals, they're hurt people, and there is no exception to this rule. Every person that has done bad things throughout history, they're not evil people, they're not actual predators, you know, they're narcissistic, and they're narcissists, some of them are sociopaths, but not evil. You understand how hurt and pain and trauma could take the form of perceived evil? You know, we cannot punish these people and expect them to heal. I mean, what do we want? Do you want people to heal, or do you want them to become worse, become even more? Because I'm somebody who I have very outside the box beliefs, and I don't believe prisons are they're not helping. And I think in the future we're gonna get rid of prisons and jails, because we're gonna see that these things are barbaric and they're counterproductive, and they don't bring healing. They do not bring true healing to anyone. You cannot. It's punishment and shame that cause trauma in the first place. So you can't give people more of that and expect them to become better. And I understand the anger that comes from the perception of these type of people. But when we feel that kind of anger, we have to realize that we want to throw these people in jail and in prison because of our own, because something dark that exists inside of us. It's a way for us to get revenge, and it's a kind of a vindictive approach to life, because you know, we want payback for these people, and how could we say that we're very different from them if we want them to pay, you know, if we want revenge? That is coming from our own so-called evil, okay? It's just that we don't see it as evil. We don't see throwing people in jail as an evil thing, because we see them as bad people. And not only that, jail and prison and this justice system, it's presented to us as this moral thing. You know, it's wrapped in morality and virtue, so we don't really question it. But these people like R.Kelli, and people, and any evil or bad or criminal people, they need healing. They don't need punishment. And I think in the future, this is what we're going to be talking about, because this old system is gonna, it has run its course, and it's gonna come down, and spirituality is gonna take over, and then we have to find out how we traumatize our children to turn them into monsters, and find ways to bring healing to them, so we don't have to we don't have so many victims, and we don't have so many predators and perpetrators and what's that word I'm looking for? And criminals. I said criminals already? Whatever. But yeah, this is what I gathered from observing R. Kelly's situation.